Good morning and welcome to the Iowa State Dairy Team webinar series, our September edition. I'd like to welcome folks who are in attendance and introduce our first speaker. Dr. Perrell Peel holds the Charles Breedlove Professorship of Agribusiness in the Department of Agricultural Economics and has served as the Extension Livestock Marketing Specialist at Oklahoma State University since 1989. His programs focus on livestock market situation and outlook, marketing and risk management, as an educational pack for producers. Today, Perrell will speak on how the declining beef cow numbers may affect the prices dairy producers receive for the feeders and replacement heifers they produce. Dr. Peel, the podium is yours.
All righty. Well, thank you, Fred, and appreciate the opportunity to participate in this, what I think will be a very interesting discussion. I'm going to take a few minutes here. I'm going to try to share my screen and talk to you about what's going on in the beef side of things and what we look at for the next couple of years and what we expect to see and the implications of that that it might have for the dairy side as well. And so I'm going to take a few minutes and run through just that part of it. It's not really the full outlook story that I usually do, but this is a big part of what we've been talking about now for quite a few months. So let's see here. There we go. So, the drought map, this is the current drought map. You probably see these. It's looked a lot like this for much of the last 2+ years. In fact, it actually looks a little better right now than it has much of the time over the last couple of years. So if you notice the colors on here, you can kind of see where it's at. It's been largely in the western half of the country, but you see the colors on there. So the very dark brown is the worst drought areas, the red color, and then the tan color all the way up to yellow. And if you look at those colors and you plot those over time, you can see on the right-hand side here, we've been in as bad a drought for as long a period of time as this thing goes back. So the drought monitor has been around since 2000. And, the last big drought that I experienced in the Southern Plains was 2011, 12, and 13. You can see that kind of left of center or right of center, excuse me, in the middle of this chart. And, we're every bit as bad as that, and in some ways a longer period of drought. And it's the severity of the drought and the continuity and the duration of the drought that's really setting up a lot of what's happening in the beef side. So, you have pasture and range conditions in the U.S. The red line down there is a 5-year average of 2016 through 2020. 2021 and 2022 obviously have been well above that. We've been at record levels for this data series. Now, this is the percent poor to very poor. So the higher up you are, the worse off you are. This is just looking at one end of that condition scale. So this is the percent poor to very poor. And we've been at extremely poor conditions for, pretty continuously. Now, this thing is reported from May through October each year. And all of last year and all of this year, we've been at very poor conditions. So that sets up and it really exaggerates the normal cyclical tendencies in the beef industry. This chart shows you the July 1 numbers. Those are the most recent USDA numbers that we have. So I'll start here with that. We'll talk about January 1 numbers a bit later. But the beef cow herd, of course, the beef industry does tend to be cyclical anyway, and sometimes drought then exaggerates that, and that's really what's happening right now. So from the last bottom in beef cow numbers in 2014, which was driven there by drought in 2011, 12, and 13, we were smaller than we intended to be, and all of that. We'll see the implication or the consequences of that in a bit. We put together a fairly, significant expansion in the beef industry. On the July series, it peaked in 2018. It was at a peak in January 1 of 2019 in terms of the beef cow herd. The total calf crop driven by the beef side of things peaked in 2018. So we've been getting a little bit smaller since then. But if you'll notice on the far right-hand side, it's really accelerated that liquidation in 2021 and 22 because of the drought. We would we would have been liquidating cyclically, but not nearly as fast a pace as you see here. So here's the numbers, and just a couple of these that I want to focus on. The beef cow herd was down on July 1, 2.4%. Again, that's what we just looked at. Beef replacement heifers were down 3.5%. And of course, they dropped last year if you look from 2020 to 2021. The feeder supply is getting smaller. Again, the calf crop actually peaked in 2018, so we've been working our way into tighter numbers for several years, and we're accelerating that a little bit now. The calf crop on the bottom there was down another 1.4%, or that's the estimate for 2022. So generally numbers are getting tighter, and this drought is exaggerating that to some extent. So if we look at cattle slaughter numbers, and this really begins to set up the discussion that we need to have here. Steers are down 2.1% so far this year. So this is through the end of August. Again, we've got less cattle out there, but heifer slaughter is actually up 4.8%. So the drought has forced us to move and divert heifers from breeding purposes into the feeder supply chain. There's more heifers in the feedlots, and they're coming through in slaughter. And then if you jump down a couple of lines, beef cow slaughter is up 13.4% this year for the whole year on a year-over-year basis, and it was up 9% last year. So when you put those together and look at cow plus heifer slaughter in the U.S., we've been running well ahead of last year and certainly above average in terms of total female slaughter. In fact, so if you look at the beef cow part of it, you guys will relate to this. Beef cow slaughter and dairy cow slaughter are normally just about 50-50 in terms of total cow slaughter. So about half of them are dairy cows, about half are beef cows. And what we see as we've worked through last year and so far this year is that the beef cow proportion of total cow slaughter has increased. And so we're up around 60%, close to it at times, of the total cow slaughter is beef cows right now. So if we look at then that female slaughter, so total cow plus heifer slaughter, over on the right-hand side, so far this year, we are averaging almost 51%. Now, it depends on what happens here in the next few weeks as we finish out the year, but we very likely will end up for this year with total female slaughter, that's beef and dairy cows plus total heifer, which would include whatever heifers are in that mix, at more than 50% of the total cattle slaughter. That has not happened in the U.S. since 1986. So again, all of that adds up to say that we are seriously liquidating the female part of this industry with consequences for the coming years. In terms of the beef cow herd, if we think of culling, so if we look at beef cow slaughter as a percent of the total cow herd, you can see that, again, on the right-hand side, I'm projecting that this is going to come in something over 13%. It's never gone over 13% before. That will be a new record level. In 2011, we got up around a little over 12%, and that was during the last liquidation caused by drought again. And so we're virtually guaranteed, and no matter what happens for the rest of the year, to have a net culling rate of over 13% on the beef cow side of things. So if you go back and look at that cow inventory, these are January 1 numbers now. I've shaded in yellow the various expansion periods that we've seen in the last 30 years or so. And the most recent one, again, from a low in 2014 to 2019, we put together a fairly aggressive expansion following the drought liquidation prior to that. And then on the far right-hand side, again, I'm projecting at this point that by the end of this year, the beef cow herd will be down about as low as it was in 2014. It could be slightly higher or even slightly lower, depending on what happens here as we go forward. What's key for the discussion that we're having today is sort of the dynamics of how that expansion and liquidation happen. So if you look at that expansion period, that shaded yellow, here we see how that happens, really the cow dynamics, the cow herd dynamics that make that herd expansion possible. And the blue line is heifer retention. So that's beef replacement heifers in this case as a percent of the cow herd. And you can see that, in order to expand the herd from 2014 to 2019, that thing went to a record level of about 21%. So in other words, we had it at least for a couple of years there, 21% of the beef cow herd. We had that many replacement heifers we were saving. Obviously, that's a big retention rate. At the same time, in response to the low cow herd and the need to rebuild, we took cow culling to a record low level in the red line. So in 2015, the beef cow culling rate dropped below 8%. And I say all that to say that given where we are now on the far right-hand side, we've got that 13% culling rate. We've got heifer retention just kind of hanging in there. In fact, when you look at those slaughter numbers, it's pretty clear that we're sort of emptying out the beef replacement side. So at some point in time, we're going to see these drought conditions at some point will improve. We trust. We're not sure when, and that's one of the questions about timing. But certainly at some point we're going to be very interested in rebuilding. The bottom line is that the drought last year and this year, and it really started in late 2020, is taking the beef part of this industry down to low levels of inventory that we did not plan to be, do not need to be, and the market is going to want us to be bigger than that when we get a chance to rebuild. So when you look at those dynamics there of saving a lot of heifers in 2015, 2016 to rebuild the herd and cutting cow culling, that takes a lot of animals out of the slaughter mix, the combination of what you do with heifers and cows. And so if you look at this, the blue line is it's total cattle slaughter. And in 2015, that dropped to the lowest level since 1963. And of course, the red line shows you what calf prices did. These are 500 to 600 pound calves. And there's very much a correspondence there. When the slaughter rate dropped, beef production dropped, and those calf prices responded. And again, I say all that to say that, we're setting up for something similar to that going forward. We don't know exactly when. The timing's a bit uncertain. So if you look at these annual average prices over time, obviously the most notable feature on here, well, there's really two things I want to point out. One is we've got a trend built in on the right-hand side of generally higher prices out to 2024 in these current forecasts. Now, these will get changed, of course. They're updated constantly, but that's the current projections. We've already got a significant trend in place, and we're well above currently where we were a year ago. But at some point in time, we're probably going to do something similar to what we did in that 2014, 2015 period, where you see that spike in calf prices, feeder cattle prices, fed cattle prices. Somewhere in this 2023 to 2026 period, I think we're going to see something like that again. Don't know exactly when. That's a tricky part. And we don't know how long it'll last. It didn't last all that long the last time, 18 to 24 months. But we had a very pronounced market signal there to save females. We saw, of course, record high calf prices, breeding animal prices, replacement heifers and cows were extremely valuable. And I do think that we're setting up for something like that. It could start as early as 2023. It may be a little more likely to actually kick in something like 2024. I just wanted to show you, this is a table that I need. I need to step away, Fred. I'll be right back.
Darrell, we will kind of move on through the program. For those of you who have in the beef industry, you know that Darrell does a market report with RFD-TV, and he's doing that right now. So we're going to go ahead and move over to Brandon Peterson. We'll go ahead. I think you're set up so you can share your screen, Brandon. While you're doing that, I will go ahead and introduce you. Brandon is the Director of Sales at Trans Ova Genetics, where he leads a sales team that continues Trans Ova's impact of advanced reproductive technologies on beef and dairy sectors, both in this country and internationally. Today, he's going to help producers understand the dairy beef opportunities and how they can improve margins from these calves. Peterson grew up on a diversified livestock farm in southeast South Dakota. He graduated from South Dakota State University in 2000 with a degree in animal science, and upon graduation worked for Land O'Lakes and Hubbard Feeds. Also has served in the industry as a private consultant. We appreciate the expert he brings to the table, knowing that in addition to off-farm, Peterson Angus, is owner and manager of Peterson Angus, 250 head registered Angus operation in South Dakota. We appreciate you taking the time to be with us, Brandon. The podium is yours.
Well, thank you, Fred. Darrell did a nice job really setting the stage for what we're going to talk about this afternoon, opportunities within the dairy industry. So I do have some dairy background, spent about 3 years before I was with Trans Ova working for a dairy equipment company, working on a really brought together nutrition and equipment, working with dairies to create ROIs and see if there was a value proposition. And I learned to really love the dairy industry, the technology that's going on there, and this is another extension of that. Some of the changes that are going on, things that we see every day on a daily basis with our clients. So really, why are we here today? We're going to set the stage now. We're going to talk about a terminal beef embryo. How is beef in dairy different? And I highlighted in there because it's when we think about using sex semen, we might say beef on dairy. Here we're going to say beef in dairy because we're talking about an all beef embryo in a dairy cow. Then we'll talk about some of the applications and successes that we've seen out there, challenges for application, what can you expect for your operation, and then we'll end quickly. It's kind of fun. Where's this happening at right now? So terminal beef embryos for dairy. What in the world is a terminal beef embryo? A terminal beef embryo is a slaughterhouse-derived beef embryo. So when we'll take those ovaries right off of the kill floor, and we're going to aspirate them in our hand instead of rectally, if you would, traditionally when we're doing an OPU or an embryo, an IVF procedure. We're going to take those ovaries and we're going to aspirate them there. They'll be from cows or heifers, so fed heifers or fat heifers at a packing plant somewhere around the country. And they're going to be NHTC female derived. So what's NHTC? It's non-hormone treated. So they won't have implants and they won't have been fed MGA. Most common forms you'll find in the industry today, it's going to be in a frozen embryo form. Very few, if any, fresh embryo applications we're seeing out there right now. Typically, there'll be sexed male embryos or made from sexed male semen. So you're going to have about a 90% likelihood of having males. There is some conventional semen being used, and even a few projects like Darrell talked about. When we're looking at female numbers, there is a few projects maybe going on right now that are trying to make some females and going to sell groups of replacement heifers back into the beef market. They're typically going to be calving ease. And the reason for that is today, well, obviously we don't like calving problems in general. But today, the early adapters or the biggest application right now is in Jersey females. So we need to manage birth weights and calving shape, which goes into calving ease greatly. So right now, most of those embryos are calving ease specific embryos. Most of them will be Angus or Wagyu Angus cross would be the most common forms of terminal beef embryos you'll find today. So why? So this slide gets a little bit busy, but it does such a good job. I've thought about cutting it down to 3 or 4 slides, but it does a nice job. So why? There's nothing more expensive than a missed opportunity. If we look at the dairy industry, their commitment to be carbon neutral by 2050, I've seen recently, maybe even as early as 2040, 2041, they may be able to accomplish this. There's also pressure on the beef feeding industry to reduce its carbon footprint. We have a growing world population with less land available for agriculture. I believe a year ago, the statistic was that we lose over 1 million acres a year to urban sprawl, meaning once concrete goes on that land, we'll never farm it again, more than likely. And then water usage is a big challenge for agriculture. Not so much in Iowa or even eastern South Dakota, where I'm from, but as you move west and then as you move around the globe, water is a huge concern as we fight for water for agriculture, water for drinking, water for humans. Water in general is a major challenge. If we look at the dairy industry, about 9 million a head of cattle, regardless, maybe it's a little bit up or down if we're in an expansion or a contraction phase. About 3 million of those, depending upon what phase we're in, will be used to make replacement heifers annually. The other 6 million dairy cows are producing animals that are going to enter the beef supply chain. They're going to become beef, and they have become beef for the last several years. So we're not making a major shift, at least in the last 10 years, of number of animals that are entering the beef supply chain. We're maybe looking at making a shift of the quality or what kinds of meat will be entering the supply chain. So of those 6 million calves, today, most of them are a dairy beef cross. A small percentage of them are actually still traditional Holstein or maybe even a few Jersey steers. The Holstein beef cross calves, right now, they're seeing a stronger day-old price. Price is around $180, maybe $200 a head, depending upon where your market is. Those Jersey beef cross calves, the Jersey calves made from sex beef semen, very little value to most of those. I've heard as low as $20 a head for the steers, and maybe the heifers, they aren't worth anything. So there's a huge opportunity right there, but we continue to see that opportunity grow within Holstein cows. The crossbred calves, from what our guys are seeing, what they're seeing in their feed yards, are taking about 60 days longer than an all beef calf to get to fat, to get to finish. We know what corn prices have done the last few years. If we're in the industry, we're buying corn. We know what that feels like. We know that we're trying to find alternatives to feeding corn or corn-derived products whenever possible, just because of price. And then the other advantage we have on a beef calf versus a Holstein beef cross or a dairy beef cross calf is just red meat yield, more pounds of sellable product on each carcass. And then just the consistency and the shape and size of the cuts that we're getting from an all beef calf versus a dairy cross calf. So application, path to success. What most dairies are right now using a double off-sync program, but really any program is going to work for you to collect those heats. When you collect a heat on a female, don't breed them if we're going to put an embryo in. 7 days later, we're going to come back and transfer embryos into those recips. But that's really important, getting a good heat, whether you're using some sort of a motion sensor, an ear tag, a collar, whether you're chalking tail heads, having really good heats is important for the success of getting good pregnancy rates, acceptable pregnancy rates. There's, a lot of times I'll hear, well, we'll throw them in there and we'll let the ET technician sort them out by palpating them. We find that the ET technician is good at finding CLs, but they're bad at knowing if they actually were in heat at the right time. So if you want really good pregnancy rates, we're going to need to find a way to capture good heats and know when they're in heat so we can get embryos transferred in at the right time. We're going to select the recips from the bottom end of your herd. So I worked with a dairy the other day. There was 22,000 cows on the farm. Some of those were heifers. Some of those were lactating cows. We went through and we identified the top of their herd that they're going to make their replacement females out of. And then everything below a certain line, when it came in heat, it was receiving a beef embryo. So we'll go through that. We'll either use pedigree estimates from a sire and a maternal grandsire, or if you have any genomic data in your herd, we can go through that and help identify who the recips should be. You can transfer off natural heats as long as you've got your own team of transfer technicians at the dairy. So challenges to overcome. First of all, we just need to manage the amount of time the cows are in the lockup. I've got a large dairy that I work with. They will start transferring at 5 a.m. every Friday morning. They'll have 2 teams transferring, and by 8 a.m. they'll be done. So they'll have transferred almost 150 embryos in 3 hours every single Friday morning. Obviously, those first cows that we start transferring into, they maybe went into lockups a little bit earlier than the last ones, but they're not going to be in there more than an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. So really that goal is to manage the amount of time the cows are in the lockup so that they can continue to be cows and not disrupt their daily activities. So fast, efficient, accurate transfers. What does it look like on that dairy? Now that's a pretty good sized dairy. So every dairy, as you guys know, is unique to itself, but they're going to have 2 separate teams. They've got one guy thawing straws out and loading guns for both teams. They have one guy palpating CLs, and they'll either have 1 or 2 transfer techs that leapfrog each other as they go along. And that's how they can get 150 transfers done in 3 hours or less. Transfer techs themselves, as a company, we provide transfer techs, but probably for this application, the best thing we can do is help train, help process improvement, things like that. For the dairy to own their own transfer techs or employ their own transfer techs is typically the best way and provides for the least cost when it comes to a transfer. We'll talk about costs in a little bit. We see guys that have AI'd about around 10,000 cows make really candidates, and I shouldn't say easy, but very trainable people when it comes to transferring an embryo. And then managing those transfer costs, that comes typically, like I've been talking about, letting the dairy have their own transfer techs. We can get those costs down to about $5 an embryo or $5 a transfer. And we'll talk about some ranges though of costs here in just a little bit. Like I said, collect good heats. And then here's the key message I want you guys to know. If you get to the point that you're interested in doing this, the entire team needs to be bought in. It's not good enough for ownership to say, we're going to do this, or management to say, we're going to do this. The employees have to understand the why and what the benefit is to the dairy, and they have to be bought into. If you want to break those into 3 segments, ownership, management, and employees, you could make them into more segments if you want. But if you have all 3 segments bought in, typically we have a dairy that's very successful at this. If we've got 1 of the 3 or 2 of the 3, a lot of times we'll struggle, and it's not a very long-lived program. So having everyone bought in is actually really important. So some of the benefits, we'll continue to talk about some numbers here as we get a little bit further in the presentation, but potential premiums for day-old calves, added revenue. Just like Daryl was sharing, there's a great opportunity right now for making a beef calf going into the supply chain and possibly hitting a branded beef program. Obviously, opportunity to secure a sustainable outlet for calves. Now, this is a big one. If you guys have been in the dairy industry for any time at all, you know of a time when those calves weren't worth anything, but they were born and no one wanted them. There wasn't a place for them to go. Creating an all beef calf really removes that burden of, okay, where do I have demand for this calf? Where's it going to go? What is the value? Typically, we know what they're worth when we put them in, or we know about what they're worth the day we put them in. Obviously, a useful tool to aid in management of heifer numbers. We're being pretty picky. We're picking the right cows, and really we talk about having the right calf born at the right place every day. So if this cow is the right one to make my replacement female, she's doing it. And if this cow has less value for my dairy and I don't need those genetics to live on, I'm going to put a beef embryo into them, or at least use a straw of beef semen when we talk about managing our cows. Potential carbon credits. These all beef calves are going to eat less feed, drink less water, have less emissions. We've got some people working on it right now, trying to get some carbon credits for producing the right animal. If you can model it back to either a dairy beef cross or an all dairy calf, a Holstein steer calf or a Jersey steer calf, there's some potential there for some people to actually get some value in addition for raising that calf. And then the neat thing we've seen is this is a lower entry point cost, lower point of entry from a cost standpoint into the embryo transfer world. And when we're looking at a $45 or $50 embryo now versus a $200 or a $500 embryo, there's a lot of advantages of learning how to do embryo transfer right on your herd using this lower cost product. And then opportunities to receive in-house training, continue to build skills up for your team. So here's what you guys have been holding your breath for. Expectations. Typically, we see this as a first and second service product, all beef embryo. We see statistically no difference in conception rates, whether it's first or second service. We do see a little bit of an advantage to first through third lactation cows. I think the data I looked at the other day, across about 5 or 6 dairies, they were getting a 51% average conception rate. That'd be a 60-day conception rate on first through third lactation cows, with third being the lowest at about 48% and first being the highest around 53%. Also, the first lactation and second lactation had the most cows in it. But then when we got down to fourth lactation, we were starting to see in the mid to low 40s, 42, 43% conception rate. So a first or second service product, first through third lactation is recommended, but fourth will work if your reproduction is good. Average conception rate, like I said, really experienced dairies that are hitting on all cylinders. They've got everybody bought in. We regularly see 51 to 52% conception rate, but it's a range because every dairy, like I said, is different. Every dairy that you guys have visited is different. So we'll see as high as 62% all the way down to about 34%. When I'm starting a new dairy, we target about 42%, 43% as our first benchmark, and then we work really hard to go up to about 52% from there as we learn how to make cattle flow in this system. It's going to follow your sex, semen, conception rate. So if you're getting really good reproduction now, or if your reproduction is below average, I would expect a very similar trend on an embryo. It's not going to solve all of your problems from that standpoint. Transfer costs, we see our dairies paying at a high of about $45, all the way down to about $5 when they have their own transfer tech. When I see outside techs coming in, we're going to average, I'd say, $18 to $22 typically for a transfer cost there. Embryo costs, everywhere from as high as $85 all the way down to about $40 an embryo. That $85 embryo is for a purebred, I shouldn't say purebred, but a straight bred Wagyu cross. It's a Wagyu female and a Wagyu sire there, and it's a very specialized branded beef program with pretty good payback for those live calves. That $40 embryo is probably an Angus derived embryo. Really a program that's driven by a feedlot that's going to take these groups of all beef, all Angus calves and sell them like they normally do, either forward contract them, put them on a grid, but they're probably the last one in the chain of ownership that was a part of this plan. So payback, what's a day old worth? We can look at what feeder calves are worth, where you're talking a 350, a 400, a 500, 600 pound beef calf. That's pretty easy to do. They sell every day, right? But a day old calf we're seeing range all the way from $425 down to $280 would be a current market range. And it's going to depend on which program you're a part of. So what? If I try to boil it down just a little bit closer and give you guys some information to run your own math with. So this would be an average of 3 value-added programs I work with across several dairies. It's going to cost them it will cost them about $154.72 per pregnancy. That's using about a 42% conception rate, kind of as their baseline starter. And that's what we aim for, and that's typically what we've seen across these programs. That's using a $45 embryo, and then I believe a $15 transfer is what we use there. And then as those dairies get prove their system out, get it running smoothly, they end up with about $125 cost per pregnancy when you look at animals that actually became pregnant versus embryos that didn't become pregnant. So those programs themselves are paying on average about $355 a head for a day-old calf with shots in them and colostrum. There's plenty of opportunity when it comes down to tolerance and risk. Are you willing to make that extra investment on that money, on that time, to get that extra return? So it really, you have to look at yourself and your operation and what your cash flow situation look like. So opportunities. I use the picture of the Brahma calf there just to get you guys thinking and dreaming and to make the point, but you could put a Brahma calf into a Holstein recip, no problem. We see in the Southeast, there's a really good market for tiger stripe females. So there's opportunity to do things you guys have never dreamed of. So when we look at embryo transfer, it'll be complete genetic change in one generation. That dam, the cow that gestated the calf, will contribute no genetic material to that resulting calf. So whatever you want, whatever program you want to be a part of, whatever program you want to create, there is those opportunities. You can optimize the value generation within your herd, having all the right calves at all the right day, the highest value calf for your operation out of every single cow. Then participation in value-added beef programs. Like I said, the demand for your calf, knowing that there's a market for your day-old calf, and then some potential savings on feed and water downstream of those cattle into the feedlot phase, all the way to the harvest phase at the packing plant. Benefits to the beef industry. So this is interesting. So what does it mean to the beef industry? It helps provide a consistent supply of cattle versus a traditional cattle cycle where they're all born in the spring, or mostly born in the spring and a few in the fall. These calves on your dairy are born almost at the same rate 12 months of the year. Consistency of product. When we're looking at a set of calves that enters the packing plant every single week, out of the same sire, we're starting to have a lot of consistency in the shape and size of those cuts and the quality of those cuts as we put management and nutrition behind those genetics. Consistency of break evens, they're more predictable. The feedlots like that part of it. Then pounds of red meat yield. There's a lot of value in having more heavier carcasses that yield well in those packing plants. So where's this happening? As we conclude here, my little portion of this, we've got programs from California all the way up to Maine. We sell some terminal beef embryos up into Maine, which always blows my mind, but it's exciting. Washington State down to Texas, almost every state here in the lower 48 we have guys using a terminal beef embryo. Producer-driven initiatives, we work with customers that are putting embryos in with the sole goal of generating 3 loads of all Angus sired 700-pound calves every single month, and they'll put them on a video auction, or they'll bring them to their local sale barn, and they're going to sell those genetics. They're going to talk about what those genetics are, why they work, why they're the right ones, and then they're going to talk about their shot and their nutrition program and really package them as value-added calves. Others are going to get pulled through all the way to a branded beef program. Some of them are packer driven, some of them are retailer driven. Or like I talked about in that one case, there's a lot of feed yard driven programs. They want those calves that come and fill their pens at the same rate every single week of the year. So this is really still in the early stages, but I'll make one comment. The really high end branded beef programs, there's limited opportunities for them because the really high-end branded beef programs typically come from fed heifers, not cows. Genetically, those heifers are going to be better, produce better carcasses than a cow would, and it's really hard to find non-hormone treated ovaries out of fed heifers. Most of our heifers get implanted or get fed MGA or something like that. So there is a limit to really high-end value-added beef programs at this time. That's kind of what I've got today here, Fred. I'd be open stick around for questions, and I don't know if Daryl's back with us, but see if we go from there.
Yeah, we are going to invite people to put questions into the chat, or with a small group like this, unmute yourself and go ahead and ask questions. But first, let's go back to Daryl. He can share his remaining slides and give us maybe some numbers that will help put what you've just presented in perspective. Daryl, go ahead and share and unmute.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I apologize for the disruption a while ago. I was actually on my last slide. Let's see here if I can get back to where I was at. And this, really follows from what Brandon just presented. As you think about, oops, there we go. Think about opportunities that there might be for you really, this is probably the key one. Again, this shows you what we've been. We've got price forecasts over there on the right-hand side, and then I put this shaded area up here to suggest that sometime in the next 2 to 4 years, I think we're going to see something along the lines of what we did in 2014 and 2015. So, this last slide, all I wanted to show on this, it's got some beef price forecasts for Oklahoma. But what's really important here, I updated this about an hour before our webinar. So this morning, September feeder cattle futures, the nearby up here was at about $1.80 or $180 a hundredweight. And as you look at the deferred months out here, it goes up continuously. And I just wanted to put this on here to show you that the market is already building in this notion that we're going to see stronger cattle prices going forward. As we go out to the end of the year and into next year, we've got about an $18 to $19 premium relative to where we are today in this feeder cattle futures market. And again, that really doesn't build in probably that real push higher when this thing kicks in to really get busy rebuilding the cow herd. I think we'll actually go, at least for some period of time, we'll even go higher than that at some point in time. So, from the standpoint of that underlying beef market, there's going to be some opportunities. There's going to be tremendous demand for females to help rebuild this industry, because we are getting taken down to levels that we never intended to be. And so, the fact that the dairy industry now, and with the technology that we have that Brandon talked about, has the ability to sort of step in here and potentially be a part of that response to what's going on, what the beef industry is going through right now. And certainly there may be some market opportunities there that you can take advantage of. So there's my final slide. That's how you get a hold of me if you have any questions or whatever, and I'll be here for as long as we need to take questions right now.
Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I've got a couple of questions that had come in. Not seeing anybody unmute. We're down at numbers we've never experienced in our lifetimes. How long is it going to take to recover and get that cow herd back? I mean, are we talking 10, 12 years or longer?
Well, I think the recent experience of the last decade, the last time we did this, we all learned a lot in that process. I know I certainly did. We saw tremendous market incentives with those tremendously high beef cattle prices in 2014 and 2015. And the beef industry responded quicker, frankly, than I would have probably thought possible. But that said, in some sense, you could argue that we're still in some, to some extent, or in some aspects, still recovering from that drought a decade ago. So I think some of it does go out that far. One of the things that may be different this time than what happened in 2011 and 2012 is I really think we're draining the beef replacement heifer pool down farther than we did then. I think going into 2023, we're going to carry in relatively few, comparatively few bred heifers that can calve in 2023. I think we're also carrying in fewer heifer calves that will be ready to breed in 2023. So, the earliest we could start would really be this fall. If we got rains right away in the next month or so, we might decide to hang on to more heifer calves, new crop calves, if you will. That would be starting all over again. And so I think we're looking at least a couple, 3 years before that heifer side can respond. Now, on the cow part of it, we've culled so hard the last 2 years that if the conditions are right to hang on to cows and the market signals are there, we could cut cow culling dramatically next year. We could see a 20+% drop in beef cow slaughter next year on a year-over-year basis. I don't know that that'll happen. For one thing, we don't know whether we're still going to be in drought next spring, but so part of it could start next year. I really think we're talking 2024 before this thing really gets rolling. And then, again, it takes some time. The nature of cattle production is it's a slow biological process. And so it'll certainly, the major price response may only last a couple of years, but there'll be some on either side of that as you go up and come down. And so you know, we've got some time here, and we'll see, I think, a pretty dramatic response.
Okay, we've talked percentages. Can you put some numbers that we can get our heads around? How many feeders are we going to be short in the middle of this, and then how many replacement heifers?
Oh boy, you know, we're probably taking the beef cow herd down 1.5 million head farther than we really need to. So, you know, we're gonna, and you know, again, it looks like, there's more to this story that I don't really want to get off in the weeds. But, you know, if you look at feedlot inventories today, feedlots are as full as they were a year ago. We've not actually seen feedlot numbers come down, and that's because they've been managing to find calves to place in the short run. What are they placing? Well, they're replacing all those heifers that were being forced to move out of the country for lack of feed. They're also placing a lot of lightweight calves, so they're sort of borrowing against the future here for the next few months. And I say all that to say that as we go into 2023, at some point in time, I think we're going to find that we have a really pronounced, noticeable to across the industry drop in feeder supplies available. And that's when this thing is going to really respond. Feedlots have already been able to sort of hold their inventories longer than I expected that they would, honestly, because of the help the drought has given them. But that's going to come to an end. Now, I was just on a conference call before this webinar. We think there may be yet another month in the cattle on feed report where we found cattle to place. But that's again because the drought is continuing and we're still moving those heifers and calves out of the country a little bit early. So we don't really know when we're going to turn the corner here, but we're gonna sort of fall off a cliff. Instead of coming down the mountain in terms of the cattle cycle, we're going to fall off a cliff when we run out of cattle here at some point in time. And I think it's going to happen by the end of the year for sure.
Okay, one more question. And we all know that our business has got production and consumption to it. As we see these prices increase, is the consumer going to stop bulking, or are they just going to change more grounds instead of steak cuts?
You know, beef demand has been, in general, remarkably resilient as we go forward because, again, so far this year, beef production hasn't dropped. So the supply hasn't changed much. Prices, you can see some impacts in demand. If you dig into the cuts and so on, there is some evidence that we're doing a little bit of trading down. Obviously, the consumer's been under a lot of pressure with inflation and high gas prices and all of these other things. So you can see some impacts, but beef demand has remained strong. As we go forward, there's not going to be as much beef. We're going to drop beef production sharply, so there won't be as much beef. And so prices will probably go higher, but that's because there will be less of it, and we're going to sort out the folks that really want it the most will still buy it, and there won't be as much of it. Some folks probably will choose to, to not get it at higher prices. And so I think it's inevitable that we're going to push these prices higher. And that'll be more easy to do once the production drops. There just won't be as much beef, and the market does what it always does, is find out who wants that limited supply the most and ration it out to them.
Very good. I'm going to switch and go to Brandon with a couple of questions. What do the logistics look like from harvesting beef embryos in a slaughterhouse and getting them into a dairy?
Yes, that's a great question. I think what I'm aware of, there's at least 4, maybe 5 companies like Trans Ova that are out there producing a terminal beef embryo. We do, Simplot does. There's a couple of others that do it, and those embryos are then back out. And some of them are coming directly from the company. Some of them are being resold. I believe every major AI company has a terminal beef embryo that they sell. So from our standpoint, us or one of the other companies would be the ones that are harvesting them from a packing plant with with their staff. Typically their staff provides them to us, and we will aspirate them. We've got search labs set up next to a packing plant. We'll search them for the ovocytes. We'll fertilize them in our labs and create a frozen embryo in a straw, just like any other embryo product that we make. They'll be then shipped or delivered by courier to the
we're losing your audio here, Brandon.
Yeah, I'll keep trying here.
Okay.
Our partner will select the semen. So if we're making an embryo for one of the AI companies, or we're making an embryo for one of our customers directly, they will pick the sire. They will pick the mating. So that'd be the biggest thing. Otherwise, it's going to look like any other embryo product. We'll handle the logistics up to a frozen embryo, and then we'll work with you on the transfers, whether we're training, supporting, or you guys are transferring them all yourselves. It'll look very similar to any other frozen embryo at that point.
Okay. Can we go ahead and recap how does the embryo transfer beef calves compared to a beef dairy calves from a profitability standpoint?
Yeah, definitely. So it's really what we're seeing, like I said, really on a startup dairy that's never done this before, we're going to look at around $154 cost per pregnancy would be a real baseline number we would use. That calf is going to be on average, depending upon what program you're in. Those are numbers we'd have to run specifically for you and your operation. But on average of 3 different programs, they're going to be worth about $355 a head. So there's about $200 profit or added revenue there, which is going to be similar to, a Holstein calf right now. A Holstein beef cross calf is about $180 in the marketplace today. So they're going to be real similar. Now, if you're able to get a part of one of the better value added programs, there might be closer to $300 a head spread in there, especially as your dairy. So obviously you're working from both ends of it, right? You're working from more efficiencies at the dairy. I'm getting more preg rates, more pregnancies per embryo transferred in. So my transfer cost per pregnancy is lower. My embryo cost per pregnancy is lower. So we're working with the dairies to create those efficiencies there. And then on the other end, what can I sell that calf worth? What value added program, what program can I be a part of? So this one pays me $350, this one pays me $400 a head. Which one works from a logistics standpoint? This guy's willing to pick them up every day, or this one's willing to pick them up every 3 days, or this one wants me to make them 350-pound calves. So there's a bunch of differences in the programs out there. So a little bit of what fits my dairy and my operations, because if I start to cause a lot of disruptions, maybe it affects the lactating cows and everything else that I'm doing if employees are no longer putting focus on something else. So finding programs and partners that fit your operation and your mentality would be one of the important steps. And I think with any investment on a dairy, not just a beef embryo.
Thank you. During your presentation, you mentioned Jerseys are preferred over Holsteins. Can you help us understand why that is?
Yeah, I would say preferred. I would say today they've trended very aggressively in the Jersey industry. A Jersey cow with a straw beef semen in them, those calves are still only worth about $20 a head at birth. So that opportunity to put an all beef calf or have an all beef calf coming out of there for $300, $355, there's a huge window of opportunity where that Holstein cross calf, that Holstein Angus cross calf, or maybe a Holstein Wagyu cross calf has always had a stronger market for what they're willing to pay for them. So that spread between a Holstein calf and a Jersey calf has just been the initial driver. As we see a little bit less value in some of those Holstein beef cross calves, it seems to be coming from west to east that some of those calves are losing some of the value. As that value goes down, but also we see maybe some value creation and creativity with the partners that are buying these calves, there's going to be more and more opportunities for Holstein dairies to use this type of a program and say, man, this is a positive impact on my cash flow over the alternative of a straw of really good semen.
If from one of our producers, can we produce beef embryos that will match calves coming from beef cows in terms of output and profitability?
Yes, you can. Obviously, from a genetic standpoint, we can get, from a sire standpoint, we can get identical. We work with some really good plants that have some really good source of genetics on the other side. So finding calves that can hit that some of your better markets at 22-30% primes in the right feeding system is not impossible. Now, the critical control points always is, when did they get their colostrum? Did they get their colostrum on time? Because that health at the calf ranch is so important to making not just some of the calves match traditional calves, it's making more of them or all of them. So that health phase that happens at the day old portion of the dairy all the way through that calf ranch phase is a critical control point if you want to get large numbers of calves to consistently hit a cattle market, a supply chain.
Kind of elaborate on what some of those health issues of calves from dairy cows are.
Your respiratories, we're going to see some different nutrition programs needed. If they're going to, traditionally, like, I guess it's a while ago now, when I was younger, we would get semi-loads of 350-pound Holstein calves, all Holstein bull calves or steer calves at that point, right? And we'd feed them out at home in Southeast South Dakota. And it was, how much corn can I get into those cattle? Well, that calf phase put a lot of corn into those cattle too. Now that we're doing some, typically a Angus Holstein cross calf, we're probably not seeing a lot of roughage yet into those cattle, but we're not seeing quite as much corn be consumed early on in the calf ranches. When we start putting an all Angus calf into this deal, a lot of corn early on is a problem. We're going to lead to some digestive issues, potentially some burnout, some things like that. So we need to treat this calf a little bit more like a traditional calf with at least some pelleted roughages from the calf ranch standpoint, and then probably is going to enter a grow yard or a growing phase when they're, say, 350 or 400 pounds up until 600 or 700 pounds, depending upon the feedlot and their ability to handle which calf and what kind of ration they have the ability to feed. So there's a lot of, it's a change in mentality, a change in systems, but it's nothing that is impossible. It's nothing that the industry can't or won't quickly adapt to.
One more question that's come in. Getting everything timed right on the cow side is vital to making this successful. And you mentioned several different technologies, whether it's collars or whatever. What are you finding the most success with?
Well, obviously your highest investment point creates a lot of success. Your collars, your motion sensors, your pedometers, wearable ones give you the best data, and we rarely have human error in that whole deal. Now, we have people that are very successful in both the beef and the dairy industry by using their eyes and doing maybe some tail chalking, some of the lower cost, older fashioned methods, if you will, that work very well. But then it's discipline, right? Then it's the discipline to be there, to do your heat checks, to get those cows read right and called right. Either one of it works, but it's really about having the people in place that have the desire to do a good job.
Okay. Got one question that just came in. Is the beef industry in favor of embryo transfer calves substantially more than beef dairy calves from a meat quality perspective?
I think from a big picture standpoint, if you ask the packer, he's going to say, I just want whatever you produce, make it the same, and I'll figure out a way to sell it. But from a big picture standpoint, there's definitely some of them that really want to do this. They lay awake at night kind of getting excited about this at times, because if you can bring that consistency, and it's a consistent product, whether it is an Angus or a Wagyu, or even, I mean, you could do a Hereford-based product. The ability to tell that story and fill a box consistently with a product that consistently matches your story at the volume is a huge win. Whether it's being able to take 500 head to a packing plant that are the same genetics, the same management, 12 months of the year, every single Monday, or that'd be 52 weeks of the year would be a better way to do it. Or it's 1,000 head every Thursday that they're going to process. And this is the story. This is the genetics. As you start to look at more and more, now this is me going off on a tangent, I guess, but as you look at more and more robotics being used in these packing plants, what the robots struggle with is variability. And we have, when you've got 500 or 600 pounds, maybe 300 pounds differences in the carcasses that are coming down the rail from the same operation, from the same semi-load of cattle, robotics struggle and they don't do very well. When we're starting to narrow that standard deviation, when you can narrow that down, robotics start to become really efficient. So there's a whole bunch of wins in this deal as far as just looking at reducing waste, reducing cost, and variability of, we just went through COVID, so there's going to be a big push to continue to find ways that we can use robots in the packing plants, because, well, there were days that the humans just couldn't show up to work. So there's always that end of it. This will help some of those things and create a lot of efficiencies within the entire industry from top to bottom. Now, it's not the whole answer. I mean, at the most, even if it won't happen, right? Even if half of the dairy cows put in an embryo for 2 services, first and second, so we're getting a decent percentage of these cows pregnant with an embryo. Even if we got to that point, it's still a small portion of the beef industry as a whole. I mean, it's a significant portion. At Darrell, we can start talking to Darrell about a 1 or 2% change, what it does to the value of the market, whether we're up or down 1 or 2%, and how much that moves it. So it'll be important, but it's still a small part of what we do. And we still need packing plants, we still need feed yards, and we still need producers that can handle variation each and every day.
Well, as we go to close down, Darrell, any comments? So you've heard the poll program. Anything you want to leave the folks with?
No, this is a really interesting, when you called me about this idea, obviously it's not something I thought about. I don't work with the dairy industry on a regular basis. So I think this is a really intriguing idea. Obviously, we've been talking about just the whole notion generally of the beef dairy crosses and the role they're going to play in the industry and are playing increasingly. And this is just kind of taking it to the next level. But when you marry that, to your credit, Fred, recognizing that what the beef industry is going through is going to create some additional opportunities here, at least for a period of time, some additional value opportunities that we should explore here. So I think it's important to recognize what's going on the beef side in the beef market that are really being driven by the drought and other things, and look for those opportunities that can work to help not only the dairy producers individually in terms of their financial potential there, but help solve the problem that we're coming to, which is we're going to see a significantly reduced beef production at some point in time, and with price implications, and this can be a part of that solution. Thank you.
Brandon, any last comments?
Yeah, I think as always, there is options out there, from embryo transfer companies to products to people that can help you. I think finding, if this is something you want to do, do your research, but find a program that fits your dairy. I mean, don't try to get the round peg in the square hole. Find the one that's find the people that'll help you manage your time, keeping those cows out of the lockup for too long. Find the ones that can help give you assistance in what you're doing, but find the program that can take the calf that fits your cash flow situation. If you're used to having a check as a day old and not having expenses continue on, make sure you do those kinds of things. So the cool thing is there's starting to be a lot of options with different programs out there. So spend a little bit of time researching them and talking to other producers and find out really what fits you the best, because there's never been a better time to do something like this, I guess.